I'm fine. What a loaded phrase. How often, when you hear someone say, I'm fine, do you actually believe that they're fine and take them at their word? Like, never. Most of the time, when people use that phrase, it's because it's a learned behavior that would fall under the category of passive aggressive tactics, tendencies, strategies. It's a highly ineffective way of building relationship, building connection inside of relationship. It's a great way of building dysfunction. It's also a great way of controlling a relationship. So let's talk about what passive aggressive tendencies actually are, give you some clear examples of different types of behaviors that would fall under the category of passive aggressive, as well as talk about the impact. Because that's something I think people will often avoid really thinking all the way through when they're in process with using a tactic like passive aggressive behaviors. So essentially, passive aggressive tendencies, regardless of what they are, and it's more than just a statement like I'm fine, it's a strategy to get a need met without having to speak up about it. It's a way that I can set an emotional limit or boundary without actually having to speak it clearly and be responsible for naming and claiming what my boundary is. There's lots of different versions of it. Definitely includes verbal statements like I'm fine or sure, whatever. Uh, Absolutely, those are very common forms of it. There's also ways that we'll just do things or not do things, and those would also be classified as passive aggressive tendencies. For example, being chronically late, that would be passive aggressive. It's a way of controlling the outcome without having to say that time doesn't work for me, or I'll set the time, or I don't want to. Saying that I'm going to do something and then not doing it, like agreeing to something and then not doing it without communicating why I am not doing it and have it be a legit reason about why I'm not doing it. We'll see this often in marriages where people will have an agreement about a chores list and one partner will fail to do the thing and consistently fail to do the thing without being responsible for communicating. I can't do that today, or I can't do that this week, or whatever that is. Or even flat out saying, actually, I'm not willing to do that. And that can be another form of passive aggressiveness. Learned helplessness is another way that people will demonstrate passive aggressive tendencies. So, again, back into a relationship, for example, I don't want to learn how to do laundry. I don't want to be responsible for laundry. So, what I do when I'm tasked with doing laundry is mess it up, kind of intentionally, but not intentionally. And then I am not going to be responsible for doing laundry anymore. That can be another form of passive aggressiveness. Obviously, anytime you're avoiding speaking something, you're ignoring something. So I've made a request of you and you kind of ignore that I've made the request instead of address it directly. Evading or being ambiguous with information or answers or requests, that would also fall into the category of passive aggressive tactics. I think it's really important in this type of conversation to recognize it's a learned behavior. Most of the time, people will have witnessed this as a way of communicating when they were growing up. They would have witnessed it in their family, whether it was between their parents or between their extended family members. It's usually something that will have been demonstrated. Of course, you see it on TV and in media all the time, so that's another place where you can pick up this strategy. In some of the romanticized ideas that we have about relationships, the concept of mind reading, and if you really cared about me, you would understand what I really want or what I really need or what I really think and act accordingly. That would also cause somebody to fall into using passive aggressive tactics to try and get what they need in a relationship. But again, at the end of the day, it is really a way of avoiding straight and direct communication about what your needs and limits are, and empowering yourself to own those, that your needs and feelings matter just as much as anybody else's needs and feelings, and learning how to communicate that powerfully. It's a really important relationship skill. It being effective with that will build trust in a relationship. It will create connection in a relationship. If I know that when you say I'm fine, you actually mean it because you're consistently straight with me when you communicate, that's awesome. That builds trust. And then when you say I'm fine, I don't have to think about it anymore. But if you say I'm fine and you don't actually mean it, what that's doing is having me then question whether or not what you're telling me is the truth, and have me wonder about whether or not what you're saying is true or real. And it will erode the trust in the relationship that I have with you. Regardless of the fact it's very common, doesn't make it effective. I think one of the things that we come up against when we are looking at transforming passive aggressive tendencies inside of relationships is how do I deal with this? Inevitably, what's happening when passive aggressive tactics are being used inside the relationship is I don't feel emotionally safe enough to say what I need to say. Whether that's me saying to you, I'm not comfortable with you saying one thing and meaning another. I need you to be straight with me. Or whether that's me saying to you, I'm actually not fine. In fact, this is what's going on for me. For some reason, whatever that is, I don't feel emotionally safe enough or secure enough to be able to say that thing. I may have never learned how to do it, which may be the reason why. It may not be that there's something wrong in the relationship. It may simply be that I've never learned how to speak my needs or give my needs a voice and weight to matter. That's very possible. But essentially that's what's happening, is I don't feel safe and secure enough to speak what I need to speak. And we can look at how am I, for you to speak your truth to me, how do I receive it? What do I do when you speak your truth to me? How do I react to it? Am I reactionary and explosive? Do I withdraw, withhold? Do I punish you for speaking the truth? That's going to have people not be willing to say what they need to say to you. And then there's also looking at how do you communicate what your needs and limits are. That can sometimes be done in a very defensive manner, an indirect manner. And those things, again, will influence whether or not I feel emotionally safe and secure inside of our relationship to be able to speak to you about what's really going on for me. When it comes to communicating to somebody, like, this doesn't work for me, there's a number of different things you can say, obviously. I think there's sort of 3 different categories that things will fall into. There's the looking at setting a boundary and continuing the conversation. So saying something like, it feels to me like you're not actually fine, that you're saying that, but that's not what you mean. So is that true? Or what's really going on? That's setting a limit, setting a boundary around, like, I need you to speak clearly to me. Even saying, feels like you're not being totally straight with me. I need you to be straight with me. What's really going on? That would be one avenue you could pursue. Set a boundary and continue the conversation. Another avenue you can pursue in this, and this may be sort of progressive, would be, it feels like you're not being straight with me. We've had a conversation about this before. So I'm going to remove myself from this conversation. And when you're ready to have, be clear with me about what's really going on, I am all for it. I'm here for it. Just come find me. That would be like setting a boundary and removing yourself from the conversation. That's another avenue you can pursue. And finally, I think it's just flat, just removing yourself, period. I'm not going to have these conversations with you again. I'm not going to have a conversation with you about being straight with me again. So until you're ready to do that on a consistent basis, I need to remove myself from this situation. Obviously, that final avenue is not simple. It's not an easy strategy to employ. And I think sometimes it's necessary. Just because we're in relationships with people, when they're highly dysfunctional, if they cause us stress, if they are impacting our emotional well-being, sometimes removing ourselves from them is the only option. So I think you can say something like the example I gave of like, it feels like you're not being straight with me. I need you to be straight with me. Let's keep talking. I think you can say something like, it feels like you've said that you're going to do this, but you're not actually willing to do this. And that doesn't work. We need to have a conversation about this. You initiating having a conversation is a way to do that. Stepping into, as much as it's uncomfortable, stepping into the space of the way that we're doing it doesn't work. We need to do it differently. Is a really effective strategy in eliminating this type of behavior inside of a relationship. Relationships take two. If the other party is not willing, then you may have to sort of pursue other avenues in how you communicate this. And I think the bottom line is about how you feel and your emotional well-being, that it's not going to be comfortable if the way that you have operated in your life, or the person you're in a relationship has operated in their life, is to have been using passive aggressive tactics. Changing that behavior is not going to be easy. In fact, it's going to feel like you're doing the wrong thing when you're stepping into doing something new. Your nervous system will send all kinds of alarm bells ringing when you decide to step into saying, hey, this doesn't work for me the way that we're doing it. We need to do it differently. Your nervous system will freak out and send you into a stress response. And your job is to practice creating a new neural pathway that says, speaking my truth is okay. And creating an agreement ahead of time with somebody, especially if there tends to be conflict, if one of the things that happens as a result of saying what really needs to be said, in a kind and respectful manner, in a constructive manner, not a critical and defensive manner, we can talk about that another time, is setting up an agreement ahead of time about how to do that. So what's involved in like healthy, respectful communication, that can be very helpful. And it can then also remove the element of surprise. So when you slip into the old behavior, I get to say, hey, this is the old behavior. We agreed we weren't going to do this anymore. So we're going to pause the conversation and whatever the plan is that you have. That can be a really effective way of managing it, especially with conflict, and if conflict tends to be what's happening. I think the final thing that I would say about passive-aggressive tendencies would just be reminding you that it's coming from a place of trying to get a need met, that there's often at the root of it an unanswerable question that hasn't been dealt with or healed yet. Like some version of this, may be a bit of a twist to sort of connect the dots between, but it's often coming from a place of that core wound of, do I matter? Am I good enough? Am I worthy? Am I lovable? It's something around that. I know that when I was in my 20s, I for sure, before I started doing any research about how to have more effective relationships and better communication, let's be honest, was actually into my mid-30s. One of the tactics I would use was passive-aggressive stuff all the time. Silent treatment was one of my favorite things to do, or maybe not favorite things to do, because I would feel awful the whole time that I was doing it, but it was a strategy that seemed to be reliable, that if I was giving you the silent treatment and then you chased after me, that it was confirmation that you cared. If I said I was going to do something and then I didn't do the thing and you chased after me, it confirmed that I mattered to you. But like the joke of it all, or the cosmic joke of it all, or the irony maybe, is that it didn't actually do that. Like, it may have done that for a moment, but it didn't actually heal that wound in here. It didn't solve that problem. The question about whether or not I mattered was something that I had to do the work around. And until I was ready to do that work, it wasn't going to change anything. So remembering that where this is coming from is not from a desire to be a jerk. It's not from a desire to create discord and dysfunction in a relationship. It's coming from a place of, I have a need that hasn't been met yet, and I'm trying to get that need met. Sometimes when you can understand that that's what's really going on in the background, it can create space for compassion, which can then create space for compassionate and constructive conversations in a relationship. So just some things to consider when you're thinking about passive aggressive tendencies and how it shows up in your life, whether it's you that's the perpetrator or you are on the receiving end. It's probably a combination. Sometimes it's all that a person knows to do in the moment, and so it's not like you're a bad person if that's what's going on. Anyway, if you'd like to see more of this kind of stuff, please, you can check in the links below. I will include a subscribe to my newsletter link. I'll be posting videos to go along with my weekly newsletter, so you'll get a reminder in your inbox that these are here. You could subscribe to this channel. And if you have any topics that you'd like to hear me talk about, please feel free to drop that in the comments or shoot me an email, and I'd be happy to dig into those as well. Until next time, happy communicating, happy relating, and I wish you all the best.